All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome. Okay, I'm going to give you a few seconds for people to join. Lovely. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is MK. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer here at CareerFoundry. Welcome to this lovely live Women in Tech panel with 4 amazing women that we've got here today, who I will introduce in a minute. We have a big group joining us today, so if you want to, you can use the chat on the right-hand side to pop in your name, where you're joining from, where you're calling in from, and why you're interested in career change into tech. So feel free to start writing in the chat now. And before we officially kick off, let me just briefly introduce CareerFoundry if you're not already familiar with us. CareerFoundry is the online school for your career change into tech. We provide personalized programs in data analytics, digital marketing, product management, UX design, UI design, and full stack web development. And our career change programs will take you all the way from being a complete beginner to a job-ready tech professional, and you'll have one-to-one access to both a mentor and a tutor who are both experts working in your new field. Our programs are 100% online and they're flexible, which means that you don't even need to quit your job to do them. And they are backed up by our job guarantee, which means that if you don't land a job in your new field within 6 months of completing the program, you will get your tuition refunded. All right, so that's enough about CareerFoundry for now. I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing we've got people from all over the world here. We've got Georgia, we've got Columbus, Ohio, someone from England, I'm seeing some Germany, Alberta, Canada, great, amazing, Norfolk, UK. All right, well, we've got people from all over the world. We're also tuning in from everywhere, so you're gonna hear about that in a bit. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. So today we've got, and then please wave when I call your name so people know who you are. Well, actually your names show up, so never mind. We've got Dalia, who is the head of UX research at Miro. We have Brandi, who is the software engineer at Microsoft. We have Jessie, who is a software engineer at CybSafe. And we have Kylie, who is a UX UI product designer at Syndig for You. Amazing. And just a reminder to our audience that we will be having a live Q&A at the end, so you can drop your questions in the chat and we'll take them at the end. All right, I think we're ready to get the conversation started between us panelists. Are we ready? Let's do it. Okay. So I think one of the main questions that we get from people who are considering changing careers into tech is, where do I start? So I think maybe we should start by just going around and each of you sharing what your path into tech was. So I know that each of you have had some form of career change in your past. If you could speak a bit about that experience, maybe what your background was before tech, what motivated the change, and then how you found your way into a tech career. And you can also say where in the world you're based so that our audience knows as well. Brandi, let's start with you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Brandi Richardson. I am based in Atlanta, Georgia, which is in the United States. And I was actually a recruiter for Delta Airlines before I transitioned into tech. And then the pandemic happened. And at the time, I thought working for Delta was amazing. But when you work for an airline in the middle of a pandemic, it's probably the worst position you can be in. And so I was furloughed from my job. And I've always wanted to transition into tech. But I think I was always fearful. First being a woman, then being a Black woman. I just don't see a lot of representation in tech. So I was like, I don't know if this is something that I can actually achieve. But once I lost my job, I was like, okay, this is the time to do it. And so I started teaching myself how to code. And then I actually went through an engineering boot camp, like a coding boot camp. LinkedIn was definitely one of my best friends. I reached out to a lot of people on LinkedIn. I just would message them and say like, hey, are you open to having like a quick coffee chat with me? Are you open to doing like a quick Zoom session? So LinkedIn was definitely like my best friend. And a lot of women actually in tech they really responded back to me through my messages. And so I can honestly say like one of the reasons why I'm in tech is because of other women in tech. Like women in tech, they will look out, they will support you. They are always like, they will refer you. So LinkedIn was really my best friend. So after I graduated from my engineering cohort, I started to apply for different tech companies. And I really wanted to work for either Spotify, Twitter, Microsoft. I wanted to work for kind of like a larger tech company. I think there's pros and cons to working for a tech startup. versus a middle-sized company versus a tech giant. I think each one has its own pros and cons. But in the end, I received offers from Twitter and Microsoft, and I made Microsoft compete with Twitter, which is something that women should do, always negotiate. And so, because a lot of times women, we don't negotiate, but we'll get to that part later. But yeah, and also it was engineers at Microsoft, a woman engineer, she referred me to the role, and she kind of helped me prepare for my interview. And so, yeah, that was definitely my journey. So I definitely want to just shout out to all the women in tech, because it's definitely one of the reasons why I'm here is because of other women. So that's the
love that. Love hearing that. Thank you, Brandi. Yeah, I love how you highlighted the importance of the skill of networking, which I think can be really difficult, but so important in career change. Kylie, let's hear from you next. I think you had a similar path using like a boot camp or a program to get into tech.
Yes, absolutely. So just another shout out to, hey, everybody. So nice that everybody's here. And I just want to say before I start, I'm so honored to be here with three amazing women talking about tech and our place in tech. And I just love that. So just shout out to everybody and really happy to be here. Yeah, so I actually transitioned from hospitality and tourism. So again, very, very far away from anything to do with tech. A little bit nervous at first because I had dedicated a lot of time and energy, money into my previous career. And so that was really tough. I mean, I think that's one of the things I just want to say that was quite tough. And so I did that for about a year. It was very dirty learning. I did a lot of DIY things on my own, YouTube, shout out to YouTube, and all this stuff on YouTube. So I did a lot of I think I worked for the first year doing pro bono stuff. So pro bono designing websites for friends, family, just trying to learn the trade myself because financially I wasn't able to do it straight off the bat to be able to afford a boot camp. It was in 2019 that I finally managed to get up the finances and the courage to finally take the step to do a boot camp, which I did with CareerFoundry. And I did the UI design course, which is just the basic 1-month course where you just kind of get your feet wet with UI design just to figure out if that's really what I wanted to do, because I was still stuck between UI and UX and also was still quite unclear about the meanings of both, things like that. So I just wanted to get an idea of what I'm dealing with, and then I loved it, absolutely loved it. So then I did the UI immersion course right after, and then I transitioned to do the front-end development course for UI designers. And I think just in general, I think it was, for me, like a really long journey. I think it took me a really long time from, oh, this is really interesting career. That would be really cool to actually, okay, I'm going to do this boot camp, putting everything on the table, jump in with both feet. So that was kind of it took me about 3 years, I think, at least 3.5 years to finally be like, okay, I'm at this point where I've actually transitioned. And that was the path. But I definitely have to agree with Brandi on the LinkedIn thing. It was huge, just the community of women on LinkedIn. I 100% agree. I got my first opportunity through LinkedIn. So I definitely agree with that. And yeah, that's basically my background story.
Thank you, Kylie. Amazing. I think you're right that the career change path is not linear. It takes different steps, and you go through a lot of emotions along the way, I'm sure. But I like that you mentioned the courage that it takes. I think it is one of the bravest things you can do to career change, but probably one of the things you should be proudest of as well. Okay, let's hear from Dalia next.
Hey everyone, my name is Dalia. I'm based in Berlin, and I lead UX research at Miro, which is a digital whiteboarding collaboration tool that you might have come across or used before. My path into tech feels, I guess, relatively straightforward, but also not. So I was a big math and science nerd when I was in school very, very long time ago. And back then there wasn't even really a conversation about tech. This was before the days of Google and Microsoft was around, but, it was still kind of like an industry that hadn't yet taken over the world. And then when I went to do my undergrad, I found a program that was a combination of math and electrical engineering. And at the time, if you had a degree in math, there weren't really any options for you other than like becoming a high school teacher in math or an academic. There wasn't really anything like big data. Analytics wasn't really a big job. So it wasn't even, at the time, it wasn't even a path I could consider. So I decided to go into math, applied math and engineering as a way of maybe hopefully securing a job at the end of it. And then I went through my undergrad, and after 4 years, had the realization or the feeling that I didn't know anything at all, and all I'd learned was how little I knew. A lot of my peers, who were mostly men, I think felt very confident to go on and get jobs, but I was still sort of like, I don't know how I would walk out of this and into a proper real job. And so I decided to go to grad school to continue learning. And this time I picked a program at McGill in Montreal that was sort of a combination. It was an engineering program, but it was with a focus on music technology, which is essentially like building new instruments and ways for people to play music. Because fun fact is, my number one love has always been music, but I've never learned how to play an instrument. So I've been sort of like obsessed with music history and music itself, and used to do a radio show, and somehow had the patience to learn a lot of really complicated math, but couldn't figure out how to play an instrument. So I thought maybe this could be my way into something music related, maybe audio engineering or production, if I took this program. And there's enough overlap between audio and electrical engineering. So kind of was taking a safe bet in terms of like still kind of a career that's more like common, but at the same time trying to tie my interests in it. And as I was in grad school and found myself trying to build instruments for musicians and not knowing what the hell I was doing because I'm not a musician, I started doing research with musicians. So I kind of fell ass backwards into like user research techniques. UX was still a thing that was emerging at the time. There was a big shift in the human-computer interaction society, and going from the idea of just usability to user experience, which encompasses a lot more than being able to use an interface. And doing research with musicians was really interesting because usability wasn't really the thing I was looking after. I was trying to understand how to like evaluate creativity and self-expression and interaction between musicians. And so I started getting into not just user research, but kind of really like niche user research techniques, and then trying to bridge the gap between what I could measure as an engineer, but also what I could understand from the users. And then after about 7 years of doing that and still having no idea what I wanted to do with my life, I started, thinking of, should I go more into a developer career? Because I was coding and I was using hardware and software and building systems. Should I go into this new thing of UX design? Because that also seemed interesting. But my professor at the time pointed out to me, the thing that you're really good at is the research. And I was like, great, that's not really a job, or is it? And then I found a job in UX research at Shopify. They were still relatively small at the time. They had a small office in Montreal. I was their first user researcher there. And then, I've been doing that for, I don't know, like 8-9 years now. So that's sort of been my path into where I am today.
Sorry, unmuting. So love that. Fascinating to hear about also how STEM careers have changed over time, and really cool to have sort of been of how certain careers that are not fully known yet, like UX research. I think that's really cool. Thank you, Dalia. Okay, and also just to hear that you've done like many different transitions, like it doesn't only have to happen once in your life. I think that's also cool to hear. All right, Jessie, can we hear from you about your path into tech?
Hey, I'm Jessie. I'm in London, in England, and I graduated from university with a psychology degree. So when I graduated, I was not certain about what I wanted to do. Wanted to go into something that was helping people, but not exactly sure what that meant. And then finding that the options that were available to me required more study, more learning, things that weren't accessible to me at the time. So I heard about a behavioral science startup. It was tech, but also mixed with the psychology element. And I was really interested in that. Not at all yet knowing that I was going to be going into software engineering. I got a role there in sales. And then after a while in sales, got the opportunity to move into customer success. And there I got to get a lot closer to the product and working with the product teams. And that was where I first had encounters with engineers. And through working with them and kind of working together with bug investigation and also working with product to put together product requirements, completely fell in love with everything that they got to do, and did a lot of self-study and a lot of research, and found organizations like Coding Black Females, and again, a lot of women in technology, in technical roles, that were able to support me and provide me with resources and point me in the right direction. So I did an evening course for a few months in software development and like Python and basic web development, and then was lucky enough to be able to start in engineering in the same company. So I'm still at CybSafe, and I've done those 3 different roles across nearly 4 years now. I've been in a back-end engineer for 1.5 years, and have completely kind of gone from step to step without necessarily knowing what the next part is, but really enjoyed every part of it, and now feel that, like, having had that opportunity to move and having had the trust and the safe space to be able to try something new somewhere where I was supported and felt like I was trusted enough to learn and get good at something completely new, I've feel really grateful and have kind of wanted to pay it back as well. So have been involved with Coding Black Females for the past few years, and launched a technical podcast in the last year to kind of discussing and showcasing women in tech and how they have gone through their journeys to get to where they are. Because I think as much as I've been fortunate enough to be around that, it can be really strange, like you were saying, Brandi, not to be able to see those people in those roles. And I definitely didn't know it existed until I was lucky enough to work at a technology company. So I think that's something that I've really enjoyed, is kind of trying to build that resource and that information.
Thank you, Jessie. Yeah, I love that all of you have mentioned the importance of having a network and of having women supporting you as well. Women supporting women, we love seeing that. And I liked about your story as well that it was a process of discovery. I think for a lot of people, we don't really know what we're going to do with our lives when we choose our field of study in university. And I love your example because you sort of figured it out as you went, and you now have found something that you love doing. So that's great. All right, well, thank you all for sharing your stories. It is really inspiring hearing your paths and encouraging to know that it doesn't matter how long you've been in one career or even what you studied, it's never too late to change into something new. So I'm going to go to the next question now. And something that we hear a lot from women and from career changers in general is the struggle with imposter syndrome. Especially when you're new to something. I see a lot of you nodding. So yeah, it's something I think a lot of us experience. If you're not familiar with this term, imposter syndrome is when you find yourself doubting your abilities or feeling like a fraud. And it often happens when we start something new or when we move into a new place in our careers or a new project and we feel a little bit out of place, or like maybe we don't have enough preparation, or we just we start doubting ourselves a bit. I think we all experience this at some points in our lives, but I would love to hear some advice from each of you on how you would tackle imposter syndrome, or if you've experienced this in the past, do you have any tips for our audience? Kylie, let's start with you this time.
Sorry about that. Yeah, imposter syndrome. I think we hear the term being thrown around quite a bit. So I think in my case specifically, I think I'd had a scenario where I kind of felt like life had beaten me down quite a bit. By the time I got to my career change decision, I wouldn't say I was at my most confident stage. So by the time I was going through all these motions of learning about tech and learning about my place and where I actually saw myself going and actually doing the course and getting the information, it was then taking the step to be like, I am good enough. So I think positive self-talk is huge. So like if you don't tell yourself and actually sit down on your own, not other people telling you can do it, but you actually self-talking, even if it means out loud, sounds kind of crazy, but out loud in the mirror, I can do this, I'm good enough, I can do it, I will do it, is really, really important. Because if you can't do that, it's gonna make things, you're just gonna doubt yourself the whole way. And even when you do get that amazing opportunity and you're in the position, you're still gonna be doubting yourself. So I think from the get-go, so from the minute you say, okay, I'm jumping in with both feet, I'm gonna do this, that's when you need to start dealing with the imposter syndrome, because it actually starts a lot earlier than you think. It already probably starts when you just start the course, you're already feeling it, or starting this journey, you're already feeling it. So that would be my first I think big tip is just start talking positive, like be kind to yourself, love yourself, keep saying these positive things, because it's not going to be an easy journey and you're going to have lots of roadblocks along the way. So it's just always good to, you know, be on your own side. Don't wait for other people to be on your side, just be on your own side from the get-go.
Yeah.
And just remember, like, success or failures are always learning opportunities. So whether you succeed or you fail really doesn't matter, because you've grown and you've learned in both cases. So it's always good to know that even if things don't work out, let's say you do something and you really try, and then that imposter syndrome kind of kicks in and you're like, oh, it didn't really work out the way I thought. Just, you know, dust yourself off, get up and keep going, you know, because you've learned something. So just remember, growth, learning happens in each case. So that's what I would say. I know the ladies have other great points. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But those would be my top points.
Love that. Love that. Yeah, we all have to work on more positive self-talk. Great. How about Jessie?
So I touched on it a little bit before, but I think the importance of community can never be overstated. I think sometimes you're going to have really difficult days at work, and you might be the only woman in the meeting. You might have situations where you feel like you've been undermined. And I think having a safe space where after that you've closed your laptop, you've gone somewhere where it's a women in tech space, and you can have people validate you and validate that experience and understand how you feel without you needing to explain it. I think that is like a massive resource for any underrepresented person from any underrepresented group, to have a group of people that they can vent to and just have understanding from, and then also hear advice from as well, because not only are they going to be able to relate to you and kind of talk you through how they've gotten through those feelings, but they can also offer guidance and advice, and also offer you like the reassurance that you are going to get there, especially when you're in the very early part of a technical career. You are constantly needing learning, and with that learning you need validation that you are learning. So I think having those spaces where there's people you trust, people who just understand where you're coming from, I think that's a really important thing for mitigating the frustration that comes with imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. You cannot underestimate the value of having an affinity space and having a community that, you know, has your back. Also love the little pup. I don't know if it's a puppy or a cat, but very cute. Okay, next let's
see the cat trying to interact.
Love it. Dalia, how about you next?
Yeah, I would very much echo what Kylie and Jessie have said, and I'll add to this that, I mean, there's two things for me around this. The first one is grounding yourself and reminding yourself of the things that you're good at, and remembering that everybody brings something different to the table. I felt like when I was in my undergrad and I was surrounded by people who felt like very much the kind of profile that you would expect in math and engineering, and I was a little bit different, and that made me really sort of doubt myself. And it was also part of the doubt that made me feel like I couldn't go out and get a job as an engineer, or I couldn't do a lot of things, because I felt like, especially the men that I was surrounded by, felt very like 100% technical, whereas I thought of myself as someone who's like 80 to 90% technical, but also bringing something different to the table, maybe a bit more creativity or a way of looking at the problem in a different way. And I had to learn that that is something that that is unique and that I can bring to the table, and everyone brings something different. And even if it doesn't look like the people who are the loudest in the room or who seem really self-assured, like that does count for something. And it is important to bring that and to remind yourself that your strengths are your own and they are there, rather than try to simply like emulate the other people around you. And I would say the other piece as well is sort of, and this is something I've learned over the years, is just being explicit about what you specifically need in order to feel confident and in order to succeed. This doesn't seem groundbreaking in retrospect, but I remember, when I first learned that different people need different things in order to feel like they're doing a good job and in order to feel like they can move forward, and to sort of be intentional about what you need and to ask for it. So, for example, for a lot of people, it's important to be told that they're doing a good job. I personally don't really need it. I feel like I know when I'm doing a good job and I know when I'm not doing good work, but I've learned that what I do need is to feel like people have my back. I don't need them to tell me I'm doing a good job. I don't need them to problem solve for me, but I do need to feel, if I'm going into a conversation with, my boss or with someone who's a mentor or someone who's a teammate to be like, hey, this is what I'm thinking of doing. What do you think about that? To feel like I have support, to feel like they have my back makes me feel like I can go out and I can accomplish anything. And similarly, as I'm leading people, learning from them what they need in order to feel more secure in the work that they have to do and in order to feel more confident when they leave the room and able to do what they need to do. So having those conversations explicitly, being intentional about it, and knowing what you need and asking for it as well has really been helpful for me.
Yeah, totally. I really like that. I think it's important to know what we need and sort of preempt before we even start feeling the imposter syndrome, already know what resources we're going to need or feedback that we're going to need in order to stop it before it happens. Okay, Brandi, how about you?
So one thing I have noticed, and I mean this in the most respectful way, that a lot of people in tech, they tend to sound smarter than what they really are, because tech is such a brainy environment. It's so nerdy, and what you'll come across is, because for instance, one time I was like on my engineering team, there was a guy. Most of my engineering team they're all males, and so we were in this presentation, and afterwards I was like, "Hey, can you explain this to me?" And he was like, I didn't know what I was talking about. You just got to fake it till you make it. And I was like, wait, what? And so like, one thing I realized is that men tend to speak with a lot of confidence, even if they don't know what they're talking about. And so part of that with imposter syndrome, you can think like, oh, I don't know as much as the next person, not even realizing that the next person don't know a whole lot either. So I would say that, and then two, I would really want to echo what all of the ladies have said. I think the things that you say to yourself, like the truths that you say to yourself really matter, and surrounding yourself with community similar to what Jessie said is really important. I'm in a lot of like women of color tech groups, a lot of women groups, a lot of Black women groups, and it's just so good to have that community and that support. And then the last thing I would say is that I think it's important to recognize when you are dealing with imposter syndrome and versus when you're just in a toxic environment. Right? Because sometimes it's not us, it's just the environment that, we're experiencing racism, we're experiencing misogynistic vibes, we're experiencing a man being sexist, and we think like, oh, this is me doubting, my abilities, and it's like, no, this is not us, this is them. So I think it's important to recognize like, okay, is this imposter syndrome or is this just an unhealthy environment that I need to either speak up about or just remove myself from that environment? So that's something that I would, encourage women as well. But yeah, that's it.
I love that. These are all, I feel like I should be writing these down for myself as well. I feel like these are all amazing tips. But yes, totally true. I think I just took a peek at the chat and a lot of people are like, yes, that happens, or I relate. So that's great. Everything that you've said is amazing. Okay. So for the next question, I want to talk more specifically about the experience of being a woman in tech. So let's really get into it, into the juicy bits. So I think because we're talking about being a woman in tech, it's important to be realistic about the challenges that come with that in working in a male-dominated environment. But I also want to be mindful of not only focusing on a deficit lens here, but also celebrating our strengths and the superpowers that we bring, what we can add to tech as women. So my next question for you is going to come in two parts. Part one is what challenges do you encounter as a woman in tech? And then what superpowers do you bring as a woman? You can make these related to each other or they can be separate. It's up to you how you answer. But yeah, basically what challenges and then what superpowers as a woman in tech. Let's start with Dalia. Sorry to put you on the spot here.
Yeah, no worries. It's a really good question. I've been thinking about it a lot since, we've been talking about doing this panel. And it's kind of interesting because I feel like, again, when I was in engineering school, which was like 2003 to 2007, there wasn't really any conversations about like women in like tech or women in that environment. Like, yes, we were always the minority, but I think the attitude back then was like, keep your head low, do your work, don't draw attention to yourself as a woman. I think a lot of those things still prevail, but sort of like talk in a different tone, essentially adopt masculine traits in order to fit in and to sort of not bring attention. And I think for better or for worse, I sort of adopted a lot of these things, and in retrospect have been sort of like, did I need to do that? If I was coming up, in my studies right now or entering the tech world newly, would their support look different? Would I have not had to like suppress some aspects of my personality in order to, fit in more with the boys and be taken seriously? So I feel like nowadays the challenges more and more that I'm seeing is like, especially like as a woman in leadership too, it's sort of the weight of being the only person who sees the optics in a room and having to call it out, and being in the position of feeling like you're the one who has to call it out. And it's again like anybody who's in a minority position or who is feeling oppressed in any way whatsoever, having that additional burden of having to call that out for themselves. And so often finding myself in a room where I'm looking at people being calibrated for performance, and it's like, well, it seems like all the people that are getting promoted this time around are men, and sort of being like, does anybody else see that? Am I the only person who sees that? Should I call that out? What's the right way to call that out? How do I bring it up in such a way that it's a constructive conversation and we're not leaning on any form of tokenism to change our decisions about who's getting the promotions? It's seeing groups of people who are getting together in a room to plan a strategy or a roadmap and having to raise my hand and be like, all of the people in the room are men, and all, our data and our research shows that our product is actually being used by a majority women, and you don't have representation in the people who are making those decisions. And again, making that call without feeling like, I'm trying to play politics or trying to get myself into the room, but just being like, hey, we need to kind of look at that differently. So I feel like that is sort of may not seem like a huge challenge compared to, what a lot of other people experience, but I think the weight of being that only person and questioning yourself a lot and questioning whether other people see it or don't see it, and then having to call it out, has been kind of challenging for me. I would say in terms of strength, this has been like a bit of a double-edged sword, but I definitely feel like, emotional intelligence and kind of more of that self-awareness and awareness for others that women bring into a room has been quite indispensable for me. And I'm glad to see, more recently, for example, Mark Zuckerberg talking about Sheryl Sandberg being someone whose superpower is bringing that emotional intelligence to the room. And I firmly believe that it's been a big part of my trajectory and why I've been successful in certain ways. Time it also can feel like a burden in that, in a lot of conversations, especially with men entering, the difficult conversation with, I'll have situations where, for example, a woman on my team is having a challenge with a man who is higher ranking and a decision maker in their group. And I have to sort of wade in and try to kind of solve for these problems. In a lot of ways, sometimes the way that you win their trust is like, oh, I know that you're really stressed out. I understand that there are a lot of things on your plate. Like, help me help you. Help me understand that. And it's exhausting in some ways. Like it does kind of help us get through some of the issues, and it helps them open up and helps them be receptive to that feedback. And when I'm trying to smooth the situation, but at the same time, it's a burden, I would say, to constantly having to bring that to the table and care about how other people feel and leverage that emotional intelligence. So yeah, that would be what I'd say as both a strength and sometimes a detriment or a burden as well.
I love that. That was a great answer. And I want to just bring up something that you brought up at the beginning of that answer. I do think sometimes it's, as an underrepresented group, we can sometimes feel invisible, but also hyper visible. And as women, we can't really separate our identities from who we are in the workplace because other people don't. They see us, as we've got this like double consciousness that I think a lot of underrepresented or marginalized groups experience. And I think that can be a really difficult dynamic to navigate. But is also a strength, right? The fact that we can see things in a different way and bring up this emotional intelligence, bring up the, this nuanced view of the world because we see it in a different way. I think it's really important as well to recognize.
For sure.
Thank you, Dalia. All right, the next, let's go with, who wants to go next? Jessie.
Yes, I think one of the difficulties can be feeling that you have that additional responsibility, like you mentioned, is like knowing that and being aware of being the only woman in a meeting, it might be, especially when it's relating to hiring and kind of strategy and things like that, it's knowing that because you're aware of that, like, and you might be the only person in the room that can bring that up, that might make other people feel uncomfortable. And sometimes you have to bear that responsibility of being the one to bring up that uncomfortable conversation. So that can be something that's quite difficult. But then, yeah, on the flip side, it's because you have the understanding of that situation, knowing that you can be pivotal in somebody else's journey, like another woman who is considering making that move, or is having the difficulties that you've been through before, knowing that you can be that supportive person and person that can help them to get through that, I think is a benefit and a strength that people who haven't been in that situation wouldn't be able to do.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think we do something really important and have to recognize our roles as role models as well. Kylie, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think we already said that quite a lot, right? I mean, being the minorities in tech, that's a fact. It's not debatable. It's not, oh, it depends on how you look at it, or no, that is the fact. And we have to fight that much harder. I mean, I can remember for me just finishing the course, and you're going for jobs and you're applying for jobs. And I mean, if there is a company out there who is like, oh, she looks like she has they just take you for your value, what you bring, they're already that step further. The management already you being asked to attend the interview already shows you, even if you don't get it, it is that company is at least considering your strengths. They are considering not that you're a woman and already making predetermined assumptions that, okay, yeah, no, we prefer to have a male fill this position or something like that. I think here in Europe, I find that I think we've made massive steps in terms of women in industries where are predominantly male. I think, I'm not quite sure how it is in other parts of the world. I'm sure it's also not easy, but I feel that we're louder now. We make a lot of noise, and we want to be seen and we want to be noticed for our strengths, and that we can bring a lot to the table. I think I'm in a bit of a unique position, actually, because in the company I work for currently, the product team and the development team are actually predominantly women. So we actually we outnumber the men in both departments, which is fantastic. And that is actually one of the reasons why I took the job that I have currently, just because I could see that the company that I'm working for is looking into these minority groups and trying to pull talent out of, the development team that we're working with is actually based in Kenya, in Nairobi. And they offer programs to a lot of people, but also for women coming from minority groups who didn't get a chance to, even maybe didn't get good education, or coming from backgrounds where they couldn't get any opportunity to be in tech. So that's already like that extra step from a developing country. But I think in terms of that, it's just, you can see people making steps. So I want to encourage women to take the steps into tech. Be loud, be present, because there are opportunities and the world is changing. It's changing slow. It has been slow and grinding, but we're getting there. And so as career changes as women, I think we also need to have that, and just have that self-belief, because I don't think the topic of, okay, you're a woman, but you're also a UI designer. Leave women and male out of it. Your talents will shine, despite, whether you're a man or a woman. It really doesn't matter. It needs to come from you and your drive to succeed. And in terms of the superpowers, I had some pretty cool ones for this, actually. So the first one I have is actually, I mean, women, we have a serious attention to, I don't know, like, for me, I find I am really picky. And I'm very as a UI designer, I don't take any, if we implement something and it's not, implementation is so far from what we designed, I'm going to be the critical one in the room. I'm going to be like, guys, it's not good enough. I'm sorry, it's not good enough. We need to do better. And it helps the team grow. So I think that's one thing, as women, we do have that sense of, no, it is not good enough and we can do better. And I think that's a really cool thing. we have a unique sense of empathy, I find, as women compared to men. We can kind of look at things. It's very similar to what Dalia was saying, is that we have this sense of like intelligence or like emotional intelligence, like she says, that we just have that naturally. So why not harness that and work on that and use it as a strength in tech in general. Another one that I have is we are career changers. So we have serious survival instincts. Like if you're a career changer, it's like do or die. Like you already have that throughout your entire journey. So use that. Even as women, we have that strength, and so I just like to push that forward, because you're going to need it, and it's going to be well worth it. So and that also comes with the aspect of community. I mean, you meet, like Jessie said, we meet all these amazing women in whichever panels we're sitting on or groups we're sitting in, and that should give you that extra, like, no, I can do this. And that is a superpower, being able to survive this industry, because it's not easy and it is male dominated. So we need to just acknowledge that and be prepared for it. And we also have, the last one is patience, because sometimes I find we're so quick to, like, the industry is moving so fast. It's like, when are we going to put out this new feature? When are we going to do this? And oh, this needs to be now. And oh, we need to keep up with the competition. That's all true. But there's also that time, like timing in it is everything. So when you do things, how you do things, it's important. I think women have that. So is there something we need to do? We always take that extra minute to be like, is this the right decision? Is this the right time for this decision? Let me double check my work. Let me triple check it, because we're going to be scrutinized for our work more than men. So we need to be that extra, like, more diligent about our work. And most of the times, I mean, we are really, probably you think you don't know. This is part of the imposter syndrome. Like, you think, oh, I'm not sure about this decision, but probably 90% of the people in the room aren't either. So I think it's just all part of that combination of what we bring to the table, and all of those things are superpowers. So ladies, let's do it.
Love that. I feel like empowered now. I feel like I'm gonna go listen to Beyonce's Who Won the World Girls and just like pump it out. Yeah, I feel great. Thank you, Kylie, for that very motivational speech. I love that you mentioned community as a superpower, because I think that's really true. And I think that's a theme that keeps coming up in our conversation as well. The importance of having other women supporting us and having a community. It really is a superpower. And I also really appreciate you saying how I think we do feel as women that our work is going to be more scrutinized, especially when we're a minority among men in tech. And so we have to go the extra mile. We feel like we have to work harder. So I think that was really important to point out as well. Brandi, how about you? What are the challenges and superpowers as a woman in tech?
I would say for me, one of the biggest challenges that I face is understanding that there's a difference between being nice and kind. Because I think a lot of times society labels women and they're like, oh, women are supposed to be really nice and sweet and passive and timid. And so it puts on this, I don't know, I think it puts pressure on other women who are like bold and courageous to feel like, oh, like maybe I'm not being feminine enough. And so understanding for me, like, no, I can still be bold. I can still be outspoken when needed, as long as I'm doing it with kindness and gentleness. But I'm not focused on being quote unquote nice per se, because I think even the idea of niceness can feel very like you're focused on people pleasing, whereas kindness is like, no, this is coming from the heart. So I think just understanding that, and like, no, we can still be, courageous, and I can be kind and bold at the same time. So that would be one of my challenges that I've learned and kind of trying to overcome. And then the second thing would be similar to what Kylie said. I think being a woman and also being a Black woman, I feel like at times I put extra pressure on myself to go twice as hard, because I never want to feel like, oh, she just got hired because she's the Black woman. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes when it comes to being like the token woman or the token Black person, it's easy to think that. And I think in the past, I put extra pressure on myself to go twice as hard. And now I'm at a space where I'm like, I don't have to prove anything to anybody. I got here off of my own skills and my abilities and my intelligence. And I think just being content with that has well, at first it was a challenge, but now I feel like I've become much more content with my own abilities. And then I would say superpower, I just echo what all the women have already said. I think emotional intelligence is definitely a superpower that women bring. And just the ability to actually empathize with people and sit with your colleagues, especially when they are faced with any sort of injustice. I think just being able to sit and listen and not feel as though you always have to like have a comment, but like sit and listen and also like defend them and stick up for them. I think emotional intelligence is definitely something that we bring. And another superpower I would say is I just love, like, a lot of women right now, we are just fighting for like our voice. We're fighting for like equal pay. We're fighting for all of these things that really matter and like impact our lives. And so, yeah, that's all I have.
Love that. Love that. Yeah, it reminds me when I was at the very beginning of my career, I don't know if you know this book, but my sister told me to read Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. Yeah, fascinating book, but I do feel like it pushed this idea of like, don't be nice, don't go around offering chocolates to everyone. But then it pushed me more towards like what Dolly was mentioning of like having to dress more masculine and like act more masculine and like how that was seen as the answer, which I think actually, it made me lose a lot of my personality and like tone down my femininity, which I don't think is good either. So I've loved hearing all your perspectives on the strengths of being feminine and the strengths of being a woman, and how we do actually have a lot of superpowers to bring to the table. Go girls.
Real quick, because what Brandi and what you're saying like really resonated with me, this idea of like trying to be nice and trying to be liked. And I had to make a very conscious decision at the start of 2020. I was moving from Montreal to Berlin and switching teams with my company. And I kind of reached this sort of like breakthrough in my head where I was like, you know what? People don't have to like me. I'm not going to do things for people to think I'm nice. But what is important for me is that they feel like I treated them with respect. And that is where I drew my boundaries. It's like, you will always hear back from me. I will answer your messages. I will respond. I will be respectful. But whether you like the answer or not, and whether you like me as a person or not, is irrelevant to me at this point, because it's exhausting. Like, it's exhausting trying to show up in that way consistently and trying to get your job done on top of everything else. So just wanted to add that real quick.
Absolutely. And I think we as women feel even more pressure, I think, than our male counterparts or non-binary counterparts to feel like we have to be liked for being nice or that we have to be likable. So yeah, I've loved, this is a great conversation. Okay, my last question for you before we move on to the Q&A. I'm going to just make this a bit more open-ended. So what's one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's considering changing careers into tech? For example, like what's the best piece of advice you've ever received about working in tech, or something that you wish you had known before you switched careers into tech? What advice would you give to someone who's trying to follow in your path? Let's start with Jessie.
I think my piece of advice would be to follow what you find really fun. I think a lot of the time we can feel a lot of fear because we've committed to the idea of doing something one way. Like, you might have decided you want to do front end, and now you're finding it really difficult, and you realize that back end was actually quite fun for you, but you don't want to switch back just because you've already committed and put time in. I think we shouldn't be afraid of admitting that, like, maybe this thing isn't as fun as I thought it would be, and now I'm going to try a different thing. Like, definitely follow what you're enjoying in that moment, and that will lead you to the thing that you're ultimately going to enjoy for the thing that you're going to be doing 9 to 5 for an extended period of time. So definitely explore that way. Like, make the exploration fun, and that way the learning will come easier. The getting good and the putting the hours in will be easier because you're genuinely enjoying and finding passion in that thing you're doing. So don't be afraid to like switch it up a little bit if you're starting one thing and you're not enjoying it so much. Like, give another thing a go and see if you find that more fun. That would be my advice.
Yeah, love that. Follow the fun. Always important in learning. How about you, Brandi?
I would say when coming into tech, I think actually believing that this is something that you can achieve is important, because I feel like sometimes the tech industry can feel very like far-fetched or like unattainable for certain people. And so actually believing like, no, this is possible, not being afraid to take that first step. And then also not being afraid to show up as your authentic self, because I think a lot of times we, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to careers, we feel like we have to like give them a certain perception of us. And I think I've gotten to the point now where I'm like, money is great, but I'm willing to trade in money if I have to. Like, I don't want money at all costs. Like I want to be able to be in environments where I can be my true self. I see Jessie like with her big curly hair. I too have big curly hair, and I'm like, there was a time where I would feel like I have to straighten my hair to fit in. No, I'm showing up with my big bun, my big curly hair. I want to everything that makes Brandi. That's how I'm presenting throughout interviews, throughout meetings. And so that would be my encouragement, is to show up as your authentic self. As women, we all come from different backgrounds, different experiences. So, and I think that's what makes it so beautiful and unique. So bring those with you. Don't feel like you have to leave anything behind. Just show up as your authentic self. So.
I love that. Yeah, bring your full self to work. And I think it's really exciting to see how we're demanding more from our employers now in terms of work culture and environment and feeling fully accepted at work. And I think that's really exciting to see. How about you, Dalia?
So I'd have like two pieces of advice. The first one was one that was given to me when I was finishing grad school and trying to figure out what the hell I could do with my life. And this was like, again, like LinkedIn was just starting out, so there wasn't really even much of a community, but a gentleman who I had met through my graduate studies was kind enough to have lunch with me and kind of talk with me about career advice, and is part of the reason why I'm a big believer in like paid forward and kind of like taking time now to talk with people and, do all of these sort of connections. But he said to me at the time, he said, don't sell yourself short. And I think that was a really pivotal piece of advice at a moment where I didn't know what I needed to do and kind of felt a little bit down and not confident in what path to take forward. And it was a small thing, and I don't even really think he said it with any big intent, but it really at the time was what I needed to hear, and it's really stuck with me since. And then the other thing that I would say, my own piece of advice to people besides this one who are thinking of career transition is remember that like the diversity in terms of like previous path, education, whatever it is that you're bringing to the table is really valuable. Tech is a huge field and there's tons of intersection. There's tech in healthcare, there's tech in education, there's tech in all of these different things. And like problem domain expertise counts for a lot, especially in UX research jobs where like you're going out and you're trying to gather more knowledge and help your team learn more and move forward. And so as we, explore new problem domains. For example, in my company right now, when I look at people's profiles and I see people who've made career transitions who are bringing with them domain expertise that the team doesn't have, and that can be relevant for us as we're considering new opportunities or new areas to build product in, that is huge. And so I would say, like play to that strength, look at that as a strength and kind of look at it less as a matter of like, well, I don't have that much experience in tech or I'm just starting out, to I'm actually bringing a wealth of experience from somewhere else that other people in the room don't have. And I'm now combining that with, what I'm learning in tech and that way of doing things. So hearing, from Brandi and Kylie and Jessie, who all come from all of these different backgrounds, to me, as someone who also hires people, that would be something I look at as an asset when compared to someone who's like followed, a very traditional path where they've only had one type or one flavor of experience.
Yes, love that. I love also the term flavor of experience, because I feel like I do think having more flavors of experience makes for a better work environment as well. You get more ways of thinking. And then Kylie, what's your advice?
I guess my advice would be, I think I can only say this from my experience, is sometimes you may think about your career change and realize, okay, there's things you're gonna have to give up. Maybe there's some sacrifices you need to make. And I think that's really hard. I think sometimes when you say, oh, you have all the love and the intention to do something and the drive to do something, but you it may require maybe to do a part-time job instead of a full-time job to do your studies, for example, because that's what I had to do. Or it might be, having to do something that you really don't really enjoy doing in order to get to that place where you need to be. And so I think that's just something to keep aware of, that you may be in that position and you may need to do that, but it's just remember that it's well worth it. not because it's like saying, oh, everything's going to be fine and you're going to get this great job and earn lots of money or do whatever that means for you, but that you're actually working towards your growth and working towards your learning and your opportunities. You could also finish your tech course wherever that's going to be, and maybe it leads you into something completely different, which is also completely fine. So it's not about like the end journey, it's just about understanding that it's well worth it for whatever that means for you. And I think you already know what your situation looks like, you know what it feels like, you know where you're at. So do you want more of where you're at? I think is a good question. So when you're changing your career, that's what it is. You already know how you feel about where you are, and are you willing to continue to keep doing that? If so, okay, great. And if you're not, then there isn't really a question, because then you already know where you are. So it can only get better, and it can only you can only grow and learn more. So that's just something that I feel for career changes is just that big, like, okay, I'm not making a mistake by doing this. It's not a mistake to learn something new. Even if you learn something new and end up somewhere else, it's still something you learned, and down the road somewhere it's gonna pay off. It is gonna pay off. I'm a firm believer in that. So that's just some advice from me.
Yeah, I like this emphasis on the growth mindset and on giving yourself the chance to fail and learn from that, and that it's not a mistake. It's part of the process. Well, thank you all for answering my questions. This has been just a really interesting conversation. Now we get to the exciting part of taking audience questions. So let me take a look here at what we've got. And if you haven't submitted a question yet, it's not too late. You can use the chat box and submit your questions there. I'm going to start with a combo question because a couple of different people have asked about getting a job in the field without having experience in the industry yet. So one question was it difficult to get your first job in the tech field without having prior job experience in the industry? And then another question to combine with that is, what's the best way to package our transferable skills? Because I feel like those are related. So this is now popcorn style. Whoever wants to answer can jump in.
Well, I'll speak for like with software engineers, because I can't, Dalia and Kylie, I'm sure can speak for other positions. But I know for software engineering, a lot of the tech companies, they look for projects, they look for, okay, so what my experience is that even though they look for projects and stuff, the main thing is being able to pass the technical interviews. So what I've experienced is that a lot of tech companies, even if you don't have a degree, my degree was not in computer science, my degree was in public health, something completely different. But just like again, that's where I was saying about like reaching out on LinkedIn and networking, because that allowed me to kind of see what was on like the technical interviews. And so what I've experienced is that even though I didn't have necessarily like tech experience, going through a boot camp helped me. And then also being able to pass the technical interview is really important for a lot of tech companies, at least for engineers, because that's going to be like the main thing. Like, even though you may not have a degree, if you can solve like algorithms and you're a good technical problem solver, they will definitely give you a role. So I would say yes and no in terms of it being hard. I would say it was challenging just trying to get my resume out there and getting somebody to even notice my resume. But once once somebody notices your resume or you can get a referral, I think after that, it's just more so like preparing for the technical interviews and practicing, doing mock interviews with people. So that was kind of my experience. But again, I think it kind of differs depending on what type of position you're going for in tech, because there's so many positions in tech.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I think something you mentioned earlier in the conversation as well about reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and just, getting that conversation started, even if it's just an informational interview you have with them, just to learn more about what they do. And then once you start the conversation, you get your foot in the door, and see if they have any open roles or something. Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in on this one about how to package our transferable skills?
I think I can maybe jump in on that one. I think it's, in terms of the transferable skills, I think it's really, really difficult to show that on like your resume, like on your CV. So you have your CV that has all these things, like, okay, and recruiters will see like a lot of CVs and just kind of do a screening process and whatever that they do. But I think once you get to a point, your transferable skills can really be best explained during your pitch. If you get a chance for that interview, I think you really need to work on your pitch. Maybe that's just some good piece of advice, because this is your chance to show them how those skills help you or make you the best candidate for that position. And I'm not saying you can't do this on your CV or your cover letter, unless you're a really, really good writer, which in that case is great. For me, writing is not really my strong suit. So I really had to wait for that moment to be like, yes, I finally got that interview. And then I really worked on my pitch. And there you can kind of use different experiences, how you dealt with different problems. And then that really see those transferable skills and how it applies to tech or that position. So that would be just maybe some good advice for the interview phase anyway.
For sure. And I see a related question here in the chat. How long on average did it take you to get your first tech job after finishing your tech program? I think this would be mostly for Brandi and Kylie, actually, I think.
Okay, for me, I actually know the exact amount of rejects that I got. So that's maybe just one little piece of advice as well. Get used to being told no. Get really used to it. Like whenever you open your email and it's, oh, we're sorry, we can't. It's like, grab a cup of coffee and continue with your day. You just got to get really used to and accustomed to hearing the word no. I heard it about 52 times before I got my yes. So I really, yeah, it was hard. It was hard. So that it took me, after I finished the CareerFoundry course, it took me, I think I was one of the lucky ones, or one of the good ones. I think I got my opportunity in 6 months. So my first UI design position, which was really great, because usually there's these like combination, like UI UX, some startup somewhere that wants you to do everything, which is great for beginners, but it's a little tough. But that was my first like UI design position, and so it took me 6 months in total.
Got it. Thank you. Brandi, did you want to answer as well?
Yes, let me just say, I agree with Kylie. Getting used to rejection is important. So for me, every 10 to 15 rejections I received, I went and bought myself a cupcake as a treat, because I just kept getting rejected. I think I got like 120 rejections before I got my first yes. So I think turning your rejections into something positive, like, hey, after 10 rejections, I'm gonna go buy a treat for myself. But it took me 3 months before I received my first engineering role. But again, I think at the time I was living off my savings. So I was just like, okay, no, you don't have any money. Like all your money is dwindling. So I feel like I put in so many hours. But again, give yourself some grace, because everybody's, situation is different. If you are transitioning, but you still have a job, then that's even better. It can give yourself maybe 3 to 9 months, but I didn't have a job. I was living off my savings. So I just had to grind really hard. So it took me 3 months. And I would also say, depending on where you interview, the interview process may look a little different. I feel like sometimes with tech startups, they move a little quicker. Or even if you don't be afraid to even take a contract role, until you get something permanent, because contract roles, they pay a lot, especially if they pay them by the hour. And so so I would say tech startups take a little bit shorter. Sometimes they move quicker, whereas mid to larger size companies, the interview process can be a little bit longer. So just keep that in mind too. It does depend on where you're interviewing.
That's a really good tip. That sometimes you can take a freelance, do you mean freelance by the contract role? Yeah. While you're waiting to get a full-time role. Yeah. Great idea. Okay. We're going to move on to the next question. So this one is, again, open to everybody. Is there a personality or certain traits that make for a good techie? I would love to see myself in a tech role, but coming from a theater background turned kindergarten teacher, I lack the confidence to believe that there is a place for me. What would you say to this person?
I'd like to start by saying that if you've been a kindergarten teacher, that probably means that you're incredible at multitasking, you're resilient, you have a lot of patience, and these are all things that would make you a fantastic person in tech. I think one of the main things that is really important is having that constant desire for learning and not being put off by the prospect of being a beginner every so often, because nobody is an expert in all things. And I'm sure that you're familiar with the trope that, like, as an engineer, you're probably using Google a lot, because it's just impossible to try and store all the things you'll need every day in your head, and you're going to need to ask other people and find things online. And so a lot of what your role is as an engineer is being resourceful at finding answers to things. It's not necessarily having all the answers in your head. So yeah, I think being an inquisitive person and someone who's always open to learning lots of different ways to do the same thing, or do things in slightly like different ways, that would be my answer. Yeah, I think you'd be great in tech.
I'll add, yeah, my sister is a kindergarten teacher, so I completely echo that. And one of the things she always says to me is like, it's not getting the children's attention that's hard, it's keeping their attention. And that is an amazing skill. Like, if you can just imagine, you know, being in a meeting, being in a presentation, and knowing how to hold on to people's attention, like, that is not something most people learn how to do or know how to do. So again, like, leaning on those skills that go a long way. I would say, like, for me, I don't know that there are skills that make someone particularly good for tech compared to anything else. I think, echoing what some of the ladies here have said, I think there's just good life skills to have. And when I put on my hiring manager role and I'm interviewing people, and I think about the difference between candidates who, you know, I get really excited, like can't sleep at night, must hire this person kind of thing, versus people who I'm just sort of like, yeah, I think they can get the job done, but there's just something, you know, that I'm not feeling there. The two things that I really that I really look for are, one is that growth mindset. So people who are interested in continuing to learn and continuing to grow, and people who have self-awareness. So people who know when they need to continue learning, who can assess themselves, who are aware of how they come across. Because as you know, as the manager, I'm also thinking about, like, I am going to invest my time and my energy into growing someone, and I want that to be like a positive experience for both of us. And if you don't have that growth mindset and that self-awareness, there's not much I can do. Like, you can come and you can probably get the job done, but you're not going to walk out of here, you know, feeling like you've gotten as much out of the experience. And I'm in the job of managing people because I like mentoring and I like helping people grow. And it's hugely rewarding for me when I feel like people will come out of this experience like better off for it. And I think that those are just good life skills, no matter where you are. And if they're things that you can cultivate in any career and bring with you to tech, and that will make you really successful and make you able to like learn and reflect and grow and all that. So I would say that those are the two sort of like key things for me that I look for in people.
Dalia, it's so great to have you on the panel, because you have this really valuable experience of being a hiring manager. So I think for a lot of people who are having questions about how to get hired, it's really interesting to hear your perspective. I think does anybody else want to take this one on?
I wanted to mention one thing, actually. I think what's key with the two ladies have just mentioned is the resourcefulness. And this goes back to just women in tech. Women in general, we are really resourceful. Like, we don't give up easily, like anything. Like, even if it's, I can't get the stain off my shirt, you're not going to be like, oh, well, it's my favorite shirt, I'm just going to leave it. It's like, no, I need to find a way to remove this. Like, that's what I mean by just the general resourcefulness. I think that is huge. And I think for me, this kind of brings up a story where in the current position I'm at, I'm actually a solo designer for the company. So I don't have another like designer with me who I can bounce ideas off of, or be like, okay, so I did this, and what do you think about this? Or I have a great product owner on my side, but as a designer, I'm kind of a solo designer. So being resourceful and getting out there, like Jessie said, I don't have all the answers in my head. I can sit in a meeting and they can put a problem out there, and I'm like, that's really great. I'll get back to you on that, because I'll get back to you on that. So then you go and you dig and you look and you read, and I think that's huge. So I just wanted to like push for the resourcefulness, because that's a huge one.
Love that. Yeah. And I think actually related to that, the next question I'll bring up is about this resourcefulness. Somebody's asking, which platforms do we need to follow to get the correct information about tech news? Do you have any favorite channels that you would recommend to someone who wants to stay up to date with the world of tech?
TechCrunch is a really good newsletter blog. They have like a lot of they're always like giving you updates on different tech companies, the new technologies, what companies, like what tech startups are going public. So TechCrunch, I think that's what it's called. TechCrunch is really good. Afrotech is another good one. I absolutely love Afrotech. They're like a blog / news company, and they keep you updated on a lot of different like minority tech companies and like things that's happening within the tech community as well. So those are two. I'm sure there's a lot more though out there.
I don't have a tech news channel, but I do have a podcast that, because I'm more of a listener than I'm a reader, honestly. Reading sometimes kind of puts me to sleep. So I just prefer to listen to things when I'm in the gym or if I'm doing something. So for me, it's the UI Breakfast podcast. It's a really, really good one. And when I started my career change, I listened to this religiously, like every single podcast, every day, and it was amazing. So I would highly recommend that one.
I have a few that I'm subscribed to, I would say. So the Information is kind of an interesting sort of publication that is almost a little bit of a gossip rag for tech. They have a really expensive paid subscription, which I don't have, but you can sign up for a daily newsletter that I find, and it's for free, and it's a really interesting sort of analysis of like what's going on in terms of tech as businesses are like evolving and their financials and who's doing layoffs and who's hiring. And it kind of reads a little bit like a gossip site, which kind of makes it interesting. But I find that like a really interesting way to sort of like keep a pulse on things and kind of see how the industry is moving. And if you're interested in a couple of more serious ones, I would say Stratechery by Ben Thompson. He sends out a free newsletter once a week. And it's a really deep analysis of like things that are going on in tech and legal implications. And sometimes I don't even understand what he's talking about, but every once in a while you get a really interesting, really meaty newsletter. 2 p.m. Is another one by Webb Smith if you're interested at all in anything to do with like commerce, direct to consumer, or anything like that. If you're looking at companies like Amazon or Walmart or whatnot, like he also sends a weekly newsletter where he curates articles from across the industry. So it's a really interesting jumping off points. And then the last one I'll mention, which is, I think, tech adjacent, but also really interesting, I would say, given the diversity of interests that people here have, and kind of, again, as women stepping into this field and looking at it from many different angles. There's a really fun newsletter called The Prepared, and it's curated every week by a different person who is in some sort of engineering or engineering adjacent field. And they talk a lot about like, they also curate articles and videos and tweets that are related to like manufacturing processes, logistics, science. And I find that like a really interesting tangential to tech read that also helps kind of like broaden your perspectives and look at things that go beyond just like what can feel sometimes like the very insular world of like software and product development.
Love this. Thank you. Yeah, so many great resources to collect here. Okay, one more question here that came up in the chat. And I think this is something that I think Brandi mentioned earlier. Any tips regarding pay negotiation or advocating for yourself? I see Dalia laughing as the hiring manager.
I will say, first of all, do not afraid of negotiating. Nobody's ever lost a job offer due to negotiation, at least in my experience. Like, as some of the ladies have said, like, get used to, be okay with being told no. But I would say it never hurts to try, and you should always try, and you should not do it out of fear that you will somehow lose the job offer. And if you do, then that's probably somewhere where you didn't want to work anyway. So that's something I will say. And then the other thing I will say is, so as a manager, it's also like, as a hiring manager, it's a lot of my job to maintain that consistency in the salaries and to look at those things for myself. And I will tell you that men almost always exclusively negotiate and women do not. And I will refuse the negotiation offer of men if it means that the salary that they're going to get is higher than the salary of a woman on my team with comparable experience. And that's a really big thing for me. And I will go to bat for that. And I will say, I don't care if they don't take the offer. I refuse I refuse to give them more money just because they negotiated and the women on my team did not. So I think there's also a responsibility from the folks who are hiring to, sometimes it feels like you want to fill the role so bad, you'll just throw money at the problem. And if you just go down that path again, because men will negotiate by default, you will end up with a pay gap across your team. And so it's really important to keep an eye out on those things. And just like anecdotally, I heard a story from a friend of mine who did a boot camp and did a career transition into front end. She had her background was in English, so coming from the arts, and I'm seeing folks in the chat asking questions about that. And like, absolutely, she came from a creative background, got into front end, and when she got an offer for a job, she told the hiring manager, who was a man, what she was hoping to make, and he came back to her with a much higher salary, and he said, this is what the men who are negotiating are getting, and I know that women tend to not negotiate, and so I'm just going to give you this salary as well. So just want to highlight that there's also a huge responsibility on people sitting at the other end, on the other side of that table, to make sure that, you know, there is some level of integrity in terms of how these things are structured, and to take into account the fact that, like, women are less likely to negotiate, but also do it, like, always do it, is what I would say. And if you can't and remember that negotiation is not just for money. You can negotiate for more time, vacation time. You can negotiate, like, there's a lot of other things you can negotiate for. I think just getting in the practice of asking for things and not being afraid to do that will make you feel more powerful, even if it's not just about the money, but feeling like you can ask for things, I think, is a really important skill to cultivate.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really great advice. And I think we need more managers who are willing to take that stand and make sure that our pay are, you know, equal or on par. And I think it's also a really good lesson, because for the people who are joining the conversation, you're not always going to be new starters in a new career. At some point, you might become managers. And I think it's a really good lesson to have from Dalia, who's been in the career for a long time, to carry that forward and pay it forward when somebody else is asking for a negotiated salary. Brandi, do you want to speak on this? Because I know you mentioned this earlier in the chat as well.
Yeah, I first wanted to say shout out to Dalia, because that is amazing that you do that. And not a lot of managers do that. And so thank you. That just makes me feel so good. I'm like, okay. But I would also say one of the tips that I've learned, like when I'm negotiating with, because a lot of times when you negotiate, I think a lot of times you may interact with the recruiter with the negotiations. And like, one thing I've done is to not give them a salary, right? If they ask like, hey, what is your salary range? I always flip this question and say, actually, thank you so much. Can you give me the salary range for this position? Because a lot of times with women, we, like Dalia said, we'll give them a salary that's so much lower than what the range is. And so I always flip the question and ask the recruiter for the salary range. And then whatever they tell me, I'll say that I am looking to make 15% more than that. That way, you know, we can, hopefully they'll go up, or even if they don't go up, at least I'm just throwing it out there. And then another thing that I do, a lot of times when they give you an offer, it's really tempting to just immediately accept the offer, like immediately over the phone, because you're like nervous, but you're also excited. One thing I've learned is, like, I'll say, thank you so much. I'm super excited. If you could give me 24 hours to discuss this over with my family. I always like say I'm doing with my family. That way it's not just on me. And then I'll get back to you. And what that does is it gives you time to do your research. It gives you some time to like think about it. And then if you want to come back and like negotiate, you can, or whatever. Well, always negotiate, but just kind of don't immediately accept the offer. Because I think we do that a lot of times just out of nervousness. But give yourself some time to think about it, and always say, hey, I want to discuss this with my family. Even if you don't have like an actual person, just say, like, you know, that way it takes the pressure off of you. And doing your research is really important though. Another website, not another, but a website that I've used in the past it's a website called levels.fyi. They're really good. They have all of these like tech companies on there and the salaries that's posted. And I'll post that, the site in the chat, but that's a really good website that I've used. That and Glassdoor, I think is good too. But levels.fyi is specifically a tech website with all the salaries and all of that. And so I guess those are just some of the tips that I've used. Always ask them for the salary range, and then never immediately accept the offer. Just give yourself some time, get 24 hours to think about it. Let them know you're super excited, but you just want to, take some time to discuss it over and to think about it. So those are my tips.
Yeah, this is all amazing advice. I'm like furiously typing away into Google to find what you mentioned. Thank you. Yes, if you could post that in the chat, that would be great. So I want to be mindful of the time. I do know we have some amazing questions still that we haven't had time to get to. Mostly they were about age, like what age you can go into tech, and also the experience of being a mother. Can you do UX UI while being a mother? I would say absolutely you can at any point in your life go into tech, and we don't have any mothers on the panel today, but I think maybe the answer to the kindergarten teacher is somewhat relevant in the sense that you have so many skills that you learn as a mother that they would be transferable as well into your job, and it is manageable. It's hard, but it's manageable. And if you didn't get a question answered today, or if you want to hear from more amazing women in tech, we have another Women in Tech panel coming on September 29th. So you can join in on that one and maybe ask your question then and it'll be answered. I just wanted to take a moment to thank our amazing panelists, Dalia, Kylie, Jessie, and Brandi. This has been such a fascinating conversation. I feel like I've learned so much from each of you. And I'm really, really glad that we got to meet and have this chat and that you all got to meet each other as well. So thank you. And I also want to thank our audience for being so engaged and for participating in the chat and with your questions. It's been amazing to get to hear more from you. I know a lot of you have been networking in the chat as well, sharing your LinkedIns. So go ahead and do that if you want to. Briefly, let me just remind you before we go that it's September, so we're offering our Women in Tech scholarships here at CareerFoundry, which means that you get up to 18.5% off on our main career change programs. And the reason we're doing this is because as we've been discussing in this conversation, women are still vastly underrepresented in crucial industries like tech. And I think we as women have also borne the brunt of the social and economic devastation caused by the pandemic. Especially when we consider women in marginalized communities, these inequalities are even more exaggerated. So I think it's really important to offer some financial assistance to women. We hope that our Women in Tech scholarship encourages even more women to pursue careers in the tech industry and become leaders and role models for other women. If you want to get that scholarship, all you have to do is book a call with one of our lovely program advisors, and they will walk you through the process. If you're watching this on Big Marker, you can click on that yellow sticker on the top right. And you'll get a link to that where you find out more information. And that's all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you for all you do and for being role models to future women in tech. I'm so grateful that we had this conversation. And see you all next time. Maybe come to the next panel and we'll talk to you then. Anyone want to say any last parting words?
Just going to say thank you. And yeah, thanks for inviting me. And it was lovely to meet all the women here and hear their perspectives, and really like looking at the audience chat and learning about everyone's backgrounds and how they're trying to figure out and navigate their different paths. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll just find me by my name. And yeah, just want to say it was an absolute pleasure.
Yes, same. Good luck, everyone. You got this.
Absolutely. Good luck, guys. We're here for you. You're not alone. And I also like to thank Maria for being a great host for this meeting. It's fantastic. You did a fantastic